from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
One of our enjoyments each year is to have one or more poets on this program to talk about the process of writing poetry, and also to have our guests to do some reading of their work. And we're so pleased to welcome to the program today our friend Eleanor Bowers, who I am happy to report won the 1995 Poet of the Year from the Idaho Writers League. She has written many poems, and we've had the opportunity to hear those at different gatherings, including the International Human Rights Conference was held in Coeur d'Alene 2 years ago. Eleanor, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program, and we congratulate you on your award here in 1995 as the Poet of the Year in our state, and it was most deserved, and we are very pleased about that, and thank you for coming and being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm, as always, pleased to have Janelle Burke, our regular panelist, who's an attorney in Idaho, and I'm going to ask Janelle to commence today's questioning.
It is such a delight to have you here. You're a poet who's had success, and you've been published, and you've had recognition of your poems. How did you actually act on it? Many of us have ideas we think we'd like to write about, either in story form or in poetry form, but we don't always act on that. How did it happen that you finally began to write?
Well, I have written poetry for quite a long time, but I think I really got into it after, while we were in Europe, I wrote a lot of journals, and they became easy to translate then into little essays and stories and poems. Poems seem to be the kind of quickest way to get your impressions on paper. So I think that's, and when we traveled, I like to, traveling is a very good time because you're moving along, you're in a train or a car or bus, whatever, and you can look out at the landscape and something strikes you, and it's something that you feel that you could say a bit about.
Do you have formal training? Do you advocate formal training for young people who might be watching, or even older people, in terms of when they begin to write? Do you think that they need formal training? Do you have that?
I think it's helpful. I took quite a few courses in UCLA when we were living there in California for a while, and I've taken courses here too at the college. I've enjoyed that very much, and I think it's very helpful. You get some kind of structure to follow, and you also get good comments and good criticism, and I think it is helpful.
I'm going to go back to Tony now because I know that we're anxious to hear you read something.
Just a moment before we do that, I want to ask a couple more questions. There was a nice article that was in the Coeur d'Alene Press recently about your award and a lot of your work, and I was really intrigued by the fact that you had a certain style of writing or time. We've interviewed novelists and poets and others who are very disciplined, and they get up a certain time of the morning and they write every day like it's a job in scheduling. And I noticed that you don't do that. Would you share with our possibly young writers in the future that there is different ways of going about that? I thought that was most intriguing, what you had to say.
Yes, yes, I suppose it is. I think that if you're a young writer and you really want to be a success, especially a commercial success, you must keep hours and use a lot of self-discipline. For myself, I allow myself to write when the feeling strikes me. It's nothing, no pressure.
No certain schedule, and,
no.
And you feel fine if you don't write on certain days. And
well, sometimes I feel a little guilty, but not for very long.
I have another question along that line. I have a really good friend who's been on this program, and I think is a very gifted artist. He does a lot of painting, and he says certain things happen that really strike him as important and cause him to move to the canvas. One evening he was driving along, and there was a really major lightning storm, and out of that came 3 really dramatic paintings of lightning. You said that as you were traveling along, you looked in the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 2-part question. Number 1, what kind of thing sparks you to produce a poem? That's the first part of my question.
What sparks me?
Yes, what sparks the poetry? Like in his case, it was the lightning.
Yes, yes.
Are you looking for those things, or
No.
they just happen?
No, I don't imagine he was either. He saw it and it touched him, so he put it on canvas. It's something, the same thing about writing. If you see something that does influence you in some way or give you some emotion in some way or another, you do like to set it down.
Let me take that a step further. Suppose it really comes to, I'm always intrigued by artists and individuals in the humanities and all, how this emerges out of them. Do you have to do that right then, or does it stay with you, and can you wait a number of hours or even day and write the poem later?
It's better to do it as soon as possible. It's amazing how quickly what you consider your best thoughts go out of your mind. So it is best to do it as soon as possible, or at least take a few little notes, and then you have your little skeleton there to work on when you have a longer time to work on it.
I'm going to tell our viewers that if they don't know, that in a publication of poems, and I just love this title, it's entitled, "If I Had My Life to Live Over, I Would Pick More Daisies," and this is edited by Sandra Marty, and one of the poems in that publication is from your work, and it's called Dearest Margaret. And I would like for you to give us a little background of this poem and then read that for us at this time.
All right. I must say, though, it's Martz, M-A-R-T-Z. They made a little error in the newspaper.
Yes.
It's Martz, not Marty. Okay, so I've known Margaret for many years, and we seem to like the same things. If you call goats and cats and cooking sort of the same thing, so we always said when the time came for us to retire, we would retire together and just enjoy all these things together. Well, of course, Margaret lives in Washington, D.C., and there's no hope, but sometimes just the dream is enough to be satisfying. So that's the Margaret story.
Now, would you read that poem for us at
All
this
right.
time?
Dearest Margaret, yes, we've agreed when we grow newly old to live side by side on your farm in Vermont, where we can raise goats, the small brown kind, following close and bleating of love. We've said we want cats, all colors of cats, to play in the shade on hot summer days, to purr by the stove when evenings are cold. And Margaret, remember our plan to grow plants with long Latin names and prize-winning Bib lettuce for good-tasting salads. You'll make tabbouleh, you do it so well. I'll roast a capon with shallots and beans. How well we will dine, drinking mint tea or watered white wine, followed by cheese and sweet almonds. Indeed, we can travel wherever we like, as long as we're home by noon, to pet the cats, feed the goats, water the prize-winning lettuce. When winter snow falls, we will pull on tall boots and warm woolly coats and slosh down our paths to the tin mailbox by the side of the road. To the postman we'll offer our best apple tart, hot from the oven with cream. In exchange for choice letters, we'll write them ourselves. Oh, Margaret, let's read Ulysses again, and this time, patient with age, unravel the prose of James Joyce.
Not only is that so well written, but you read so well your works. some of our viewers don't know that your husband was in aerospace and you traveled a lot, and I believe you lived in France and Germany and London. Can you share with us, you just kind of referred to that earlier, but all that travel has really influenced your poetry too, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. A great deal. Well, we have a lot of history in this country too, but it's in some of my poetry there is a little bit of history, little touches of history in, and in some instances, Europeans seem to me to be more open in their display of emotion and that sort of thing. So you can, that's good for poetry too, I think.
Before we started the program, you indicated today that you would read the poem that you just read, but that you had other poems that were giving different emphasis, and I would like for you to pick one of those now. I think you had one in mind that you were going to do.
Out of Water, yes. This is a little bit
and if you give us also a little bit of background
dramatic.
To that poem, of how that poem come about for you.
Well, this of course was in Holland, and my husband was stationed there for a while, and we were. It's easy to drive over most of Holland, so we. I think I read that Out of Water was a place where the witches were burned at the stake. So we drove there one day to see this little town. Out of Water and the witches. The road on top of the dike stretches on and on, perfectly straight, through perfect fields, a canal on one side, water reflecting a sky of sullen clouds, and beyond there's a border of willows, spindly green in the thin gray spring of Holland. From the flat monotony of meadows printed with spotted cows, the village of Oudwater rises up, floats, ghost-like, in the lowland mists of the Netherlands. We park on the cobblestones in the town square where witches once burned. We lift our eyes to the towering spire of the church, the town hall, the ancient three-story houses, their spined, vindictive windows. Here at the stake in the cobbled square, those called witches writhed in the flames, their charring bones, surrendering evil. Did the villagers come to watch? Some women to smile, to knit scarves or blankets for babies, like Madame Defarge. Some to raise their hands to their faces, their horrified eyes, but there and watching. And we ask each other, would it be the same today? The lure of the sound of cries, the promise of played-out pain, an instinct in the blood, a programming of the genes, like the storks, which the town people say have returned every spring for 300 years to claim their same nest on the town hall chimney.
Again, just so well done, and we thank you so much, Eleanor, and we'll return to Janelle Berg.
One of the things you do beautifully is describe what's going on so that I can almost paint a picture in my mind as to what you have just said. How do you find those wonderfully descriptive words? Do you worry over them until you find the right description, or do they simply sort of fly into your mind? And what hints do you have for younger people as to how they can find those descriptive words to use?
Yes, I worry a lot about those words, and I do do a lot of looking up in the dictionary. And I've been reading about Raymond Carver, and he says he revises, and you're always searching for even better words. But I think that we do learn. Poets are always told never to say a tree. You say ash, whatever, willow. You name the flowers. You don't say flowers. You don't say bright colors, you name the colors. I think those little details add a lot to any kind of writing.
So do you have the picture in your mind first and then you find the words? Or do you have the words coming, you know what you want to say, and then you begin to make the picture?
Sometimes I have a picture already in my mind, and I do, I sort of compare it to watching a television set, and then you sort of imagine what the next picture is going to be. It's kind of played out in your mind like a television scene would be.
Do you encourage people to use this same kind of descriptive language when they're writing, say, letters? That is regular prose, even prose that we use at work, as opposed to very typical kinds of expressions that are rather mundane and that express what we want to say, but that don't necessarily have color in them.
I think that does help indeed for more colorful speech, although we are also cautioned against too many adjectives, and especially adverbs, or not, they just clutter things up. Strong verbs is what they always tell us, so I do strive for that, and that makes speech and letters more interesting too, I think.
Well, you've given us some little hints here about how you go about writing colorful language without and creating the pictures by following some little rules. Can you give us some more rules like that are helpful as you're writing to make a colorful picture, but without using too many of the same kinds of words?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my poetry is a bit different. I do sort of write poems that have a beginning and a middle and an end, like you do with fiction, because most of my poems are all kind of imaginary. As I was saying, I don't write about myself normally, so they're all this kind of imaginary. So I do use that form quite a bit. Have it end with, you're supposed to start with a punch and end with a punch. I don't know if I always manage that, but it's a good thing to keep in mind if you write my type of poetry.
Nothing, Eleonora, you do appear at a lot of different functions, and you're asked from time to time to do that, and do you ever try to, even without a certain kind of experience, do you create a poem for a particular occasion that would be very appropriate and in a way honoring that particular audience?
I find that very difficult. Yes, I did write a poem for the library, but I find that very difficult. I would never make the poet in residence or the poet laureate, or those people always have the job, very wonderful occasion. They can produce a wonderful poem, but I don't think I could do that.
It has to be something that comes from a particular experience that you have.
Yeah.
A couple more questions on this, then we're going to ask you to even do another poem for us, because your poems are moving and touching, and I'm sure our viewers are enjoying them. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I've asked my artist friends that are involved with painting. Again, one of my friends has said to me that he would almost finish a canvas, and something would happen that would make him very unhappy, and he would destroy it, and no one would ever see it, and he might not even start over on that subject at all, or he might. Do you ever write to a certain point and say, no, that's never going to exist, I'm going to destroy it?
Yes, some things you write, you can just see they're going nowhere. And some things you put away for a while, and then you take it out and you think it's quite dreadful, and you just toss it. But I think it's better to be a little bit ruthless about that. And sometimes you think you can take certain lines out that you think are especially effective, and perhaps use them in some other work. But there are works that just don't work.
From what you told Janelle, too, this whole process, like other things we do in life is a learning and ongoing process, and I know as you think about, as you've indicated, certain powerful words to use and particular adjectives, that I would imagine that you've become a real student of the vocabulary that you do. You indicate that you've looked up certain things, and as your vocabulary expanded, it makes it easier for you to choose words in new poems?
Yes, I think so. There's always a struggle to try and phrase things in a new way. That's what they tell us. There's nothing new under the sun, but you have to say it in a different way to make it effective to the reader. So I do try to do that.
If you were sitting here and going over in your mind all your poetry, it could be like foods or whatever. Do you have some that are very much favorites, and others, although you do publish them, you're not as fond of those as others?
Yes, I do have favorites, and sometimes I find I seem to have a large amount of poems that have food in them. I don't know why that is. But, so there are certain things that you have to start watching for. You begin getting too much of elements of things that, because I like to look at, well, a well-set table and different, well, of course there's food in the Margaret poem, so sometimes I have to watch out for that.
Well, breaking food with friends, and you're very social, and all that's very special to you, I'm sure. At this time, before we go back to Janelle, I would like to ask you to pick another one of your poems and tell us the background or history, and then read it for our viewers.
This one is, where is it? 19. This one was a scene in an airport, and I thought it was particularly meaningful to me as a woman, for one thing, and also this is sort of a example of emotionalism that you would see in Europe and perhaps not so much in our country. Of course, this is a lot imaginary, but it's called Story Made Up at an Eastern Airport. He lowers his head to the barrier rail and weeps aloud, an old man with white hair. The girl has already gone through passport control. She wears a blue silk sari, and there's anguish in her eyes. Anguish, yes, but something else, excitement maybe. She's hardly more than a child. She takes quick steps, looks back, sighs. Hunched at the rail, head down, he sobs. Silently we plead, don't go, don't leave him, stay. But of course she can't. We've seen the jewels upon her fingers, the dowry jewels in rubies and gold. She's going to England to wed a man she's never met. She'll tend his house, bear his sons in that strange land, and if he likes, he'll speak harsh words, leave her on lonely nights. She doesn't know such things as yet, but the aged father knows. He was a harsh man once himself. Still, there's more to it than that. This one, this last-born child, he knows he'll never see again. In the waiting room we sit and wait for the plane, our plane, that will take her out of his life forever. We rattle newspapers, talk too loud, as though this, his final grief, is all our fault. No one looks at her, at the girl who is going away forever, the girl in the blue silk sari, twisting the marriage rings round her fingers.
That is very powerful. It has more meaning to me now why some people go to airports and just sit and watch. It's a very interesting place to see the course of human activities.
Yes, yes.
And you really captured that with that poem. Janelle Berg.
Before the show, you said that you didn't like to tell us very much about yourself, and yet I think in your poetry, you're telling us a lot about yourself. Do you have favorite subjects? You mentioned the food, but I think also perhaps your vision of people. The Margaret poem is about a person. The girl in the sari is a person. So you are a very astute observer of people, I would guess. What are your favorite subjects?
Well, if you mean like poetry.
Yes.
And yes, okay. So I like, when we travel, we go to museums very much. We like art. I like to read art books. I like to read autobiographies. I love to read about other people, especially women, how they cope with life. And okay, what else?
History.
Do
history.
I do? Yes, history. Yes.
All those things are parts of them. And reading, I would take it you are a great reader.
Yes, I read a lot.
And you would suggest that people who want to write would do all of these things because it's an observation art. Is that correct?
I think so, and I think sometimes when you're writing and you get stuck, it helps a lot to put it down and read somebody else's work. And of course, you can never copy because it never fit in, but you can get a kind of an inspiration and a feeling to go on then.
And who do you suggest young people? What poets do you suggest they read, both contemporary and deceased?
I'm very fond of Raymond Carver, and I like very much. I like Shamus Heaney, and I like Mary Oliver.
Who do you suggest of the deceased? Who are favorites? American poets, for example.
Well, of course, Raymond Carver is dead now. We always go back to the old classics, too, the ones that we had to learn in school.
On that note, I'm going to bring the permanent conclusion. I have a signal from our staff that we're out of time. Eleanor Byers, it's been wonderful having you here and sharing with our viewers your poetry, and it's very powerfully written and powerfully presented. And we want to congratulate you again for being the Idaho Writers League Poet of the Year in 1995, and good luck to you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we will discuss yet another issue. And until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.